If you have no idea what blockchain is or how it works, do not worry. By the end of this video, you will understand everything. This is InvestorShare's Blockchain for Dummies. Now I'm going to tell you a story. This story has three things. 1, a bank. 2, a transaction. And 3, the transaction history. The transaction history that's written down on an Excel spreadsheet. Okay? So, let's get to the first character in the story. The bank. The bank is a private, centralized company. Everything that happens inside the bank is private. It's stored within the four walls of the bank. Okay? Next we have the 100 people that work inside the bank. The employees of the bank each have a computer. So now we have the bank, we have the 100 people, and we have the computers that they all work on. 100 computers. 100 computers that are connected to a private network, the bank network. You see, all of those computers get connected by cables, and then on each of those computers is stored the centralized ledger. So what happens next is someone comes in and deposits money. The employee takes the money and writes it down on the ledger, which creates a transaction. The moment that employee writes down the transaction on the digital ledger, it pops up for everyone to see because everyone is connected to the network and everyone has a copy of the digital ledger. So the moment that one person writes something down, the other 99 people can see it. This creates a transaction history. You see, this ledger has stored every transaction since the bank began. That's the job of the bank, to keep the information. That's what the employees do. So, when you hear the word transaction history, it means centralized ledger. When you hear the term centralized ledger, it equals the transaction history. You got it? So the transaction history is the centralized ledger. The private centralized ledger, because the bank's a private company. Everything that happens inside those four walls is the property of the bank, because the bank's a company. So that ledger and everything on it belongs to the bank. Let's go to the next part of our story. Let's say we've just swapped out one of the characters. Now we're talking about the Earth. The whole Earth and everyone in it. We also have a transaction and a transaction history. So, the Earth is public. The Earth is decentralized. Remember the bank? The bank's a company. The bank is owned by some people. The Earth is public. It's not owned by people. Yet. Currently, the Earth is decentralized. Got it? Good. So, for this example, let's say we have the Earth, we have 1 billion people that live on the Earth and 1 billion computers, one for each person. For this example, just to make things simple, let's say there's 4 walls around the Earth. Remember, there was 4 walls around the bank. They contained the bank network. There's 4 walls around the Earth. They contain the public network. Because the 1 billion computers that are on Earth are connected through the internet. The connection to the network creates the blockchain network. This is a public network. Everyone can access this network, and stored on every computer is a copy of the decentralized ledger. Remember, the bank had a ledger for their transaction history. Transaction history equals decentralized ledger. So, that was a private ledger that they owned. This is a public ledger that no one owns. It's decentralized. So, what happens next is, let's say I send some money from Sydney to a friend of mine over in Los Angeles. I conduct a transaction. At that point, the digital ledger records the transaction, and of course, because it's on the network, the transaction immediately pops up on a copy of this decentralized ledger on everyone else's computer. So there's 1 billion computers, 1 billion connected to the same network, which means a copy of my transaction is now on 1 billion computers. You got it? So that means that the public transaction history equals the decentralized ledger. The decentralized ledger is Earth's global transaction history. A transaction history, a copy of every transaction that's happened since the network began. Remember, the bank has a centralized ledger that stores every transaction since the bank started. This has Earth's global transaction history, a copy of every transaction since the public network began. So, the Earth is public, the Earth is decentralized, which means that the ledger is also public and decentralized. So, the next question that comes up is, I understand that Shim sent some money from Sydney to LA. That created a transaction history. Hold on a minute. When I did that in the bank, there was an employee that wrote down the transaction. On the public network, who wrote down the transaction? That's a very good question, and we'll get into that in the next lesson.